Yeah, so they had a open house Scole, which Preston was talking about. His brother pooped out, which was very nice. It was nice to be able to do that. But they're done. So let's start out with our art, which interestingly, I printed this out and then it's on the cover of my book. I don't know if it's. Yes. See, okay, this is a very popular picture. This is actually from a French illuminated manuscript, a copy from the 1400s of the Consolation of Philosophy that had been translated into French. And we see Boethius, who is depressed in his room, and philosophy is talking to him. And then we see what you know, Fortune and her wheel, the wheel that is always turning. So let's talk about what philosophy has to say. Let's talk about whether it sounds like Boethius is relying on God more or philosophy more. But first of all, let's just talk about something that happens to all of us. Can I assume, is it safe to assume that you've all had something bad happen to you at some point? Something that you didn't expect. Something that we would call bad luck. Not that we're believing in luck, but we just say that. We still, even if you're not a believer in luck, or we still say that. Oh, that you were lucky, or that was bad luck. And maybe it was something minor. I got signed up for swimming classes when I was 6 or 7, and then after the first class, promptly broke my arm. And that was the rest of my swimming through the summer. This was unfortunate. Sometimes it's something big. Your daughter, bad luck or whatever. Fortune did not smile on her. Sometimes it's something huge. For Boethius, it was something huge, right? He is being accused of treasonous activities against the king, punishment of death. He has been sent into exile, where he's either in literal prison or he's under house arrest. I am unclear. But he can't leave. He's not with his family. And he's pretty sure it's a done deal. He's going to be executed eventually. He's waiting for execution. And he used to be a bigwig. He was important. And he had money and position and a good education. And at one point he talks about the things that he had. And one of them was his sons were joint consuls. Now, granted, this is a time when consul doesn't mean what it used to mean in Rome. But still, what parent wouldn't be overjoyed? Look at my boys. They're joint consuls for the year, and the year will be named after them in the consulship of this and this. And then it all came crashing down. And Boethius lost it. He became depressed. And I feel like we can all understand this. I feel like this is maybe of all the books, but Augustine's Confessions is pretty relatable to us. So is this, because we've all had bad stuff happen. And what is your reaction when something bad happens? How do you initially feel if you're like me? If you're not? Okay. Why does everything happen to me? So we'll pick some bad luck that is very minor. You hit every red light on the way to somewhere, and it's important that you get there. I'm going to adjust this down again. It's important that you get there, but are you going to get there on time? No, you're not. Oh, I can't believe another light turn. This person got in my way. You get angry. And maybe these happen in succession and not simultaneously, or just really sad. So, you got on Ticketmaster, you're going to that concert. No, you're not, because it's sold out. It's sold out in the first 5 minutes. Forget it. And for a while, those people, I can't, why do they put those tickets on sale early, for certain people? And they're like, oh, that was my favorite singer, and I may never get to see them again. And you get angry and you get sad. And so does Boethius. I personally have never been in prison awaiting execution. I don't know what that would be like. I can kind of imagine. But I do know how I respond to things much more minor. It's not always pretty. And this is where philosophy finds Boethius. When I was a little girl, I told my philosophy of life to my mother. And I was probably like 9 years old or less. I'm not recommending this, but I feel like there's something to be said for it. I said, I always expect the worst to happen because then I won't be disappointed. Just always assume it won't work out. And she said, that's a terrible way to live. But I've talked to many people since then who've said, there is some merit in not expecting everything to go perfectly, right? Because when you expect it to go perfectly, you're so angry and depressed. And I don't know about you, maybe I'm an anomaly, but I feel like the percent of things I plan that don't go according to plan is high. I feel like that applies to everyone. So Boethius is sitting in his prison. And he starts off with a poem. I, who once wrote songs with joyful zeal, am driven by grief to enter weeping mode. See the muses, cheeks all torn, dictate and wet my face with elegiac verse. He's basically he's singing sad songs. The muses are with him and he's singing sad songs. It's like, after a breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend, putting on all the sad love songs that you can find on your playlist or something. It's not helpful. No terror could discourage them, at least, from coming with me on my way. It's the muses, they were the glory of my happy youth, and still they comfort me in hapless age. Old age came suddenly by suffering sped, and grief then bade her government begin. My hair untimely white upon my head, and I a worn-out bone bag hung with flesh. Death would be a blessing, if it spared the glad but heeded invocations from the wretch. Why doesn't death just take the people who want to die and leave the people who want to keep living? But now death's ears are deaf to hopeless cries. His hands refuse to close poor weeping eyes. While with success false fortune favored me, 1 hour of sadness could not have thrown me down. But now her trustless countenance is clouded. Small welcome to the days that lengthen life. Foolish the friends that called me happy then, for falling shows a man stood insecure. He's singing his little sad song with the muses and saying, oh, I was never really happy because I lost it all. And in comes a woman. It was difficult. Oh, no, let me start before that. She was so full of years that I could hardly think of her as my own generation. And yet she possessed a vivid color and undiminished vigor. She looks so old, but yet she looks lively and fresh and young, and like the years haven't really touched her. It was difficult to be sure of her height, for sometimes she was of average human size, while at other times she seemed to touch the very sky with the top of her head. And when she lifted herself even higher, come on in, gentlemen, she pierced it and was lost to human sight. Sometimes she just seems normal. Sometimes she seems so huge and lofty. We're just at the very beginning, we're describing philosophy. Sometimes she seems so huge and lofty, I can't even see her head in the clouds. Her clothes were made of imperishable material, of the finest thread woven with the most delicate skill. Later, she told me that she had made them with her own hands. Their splendor, however, was obscured by a kind of film, as of long neglect, like statues covered in dust. Why is philosophy covered with a film like dust on a statue? Yeah, and maybe everyone else is too. Nobody visits philosophy anymore. Nobody listens to her. She says, it says, her dress had been torn by the hands of marauders who had each carried off such pieces as he could get. Her clothes were all torn. Another page, we hear her story of why her clothes are torn. She says, this is hardly the first time wisdom has been threatened with danger by the forces of evil. In olden times, too. Before the time of my servant Plato, I fought many a great battle against the reckless forces of folly. And then, in Plato's own lifetime, his master Socrates was unjustly put to death, a victorious death, with me at his side. After that, the mobs of Epicureans and Stoics and all the others, each did all they could to seize for themselves the inheritance of wisdom that he left. As part of their plunder, they tried to carry me off. But I fought and struggled, and in the fight, the robe was torn, which I had woven with my own hands. People have ripped philosophy to shreds. She said after Socrates and Plato, it was all downhill. And all those philosophy schools just grabbed what they could. This is philosophy. And she doesn't think much about sitting around singing the sad songs, apparently. In fact, she's kind of insulting. Who, she demanded with her piercing eyes alight with fire, has allowed these hysterical sluts to approach this sick man's bedside? You have got to stop singing the sad songs, Boethius. You need a doctor. You don't need, the I'm Depressed playlist by the Muses. So she comes to him and says, it is nothing serious. Come on in, Isabella. Oh. Only a touch of amnesia. He is suffering, the common disease of deluded minds. He has forgotten for a while who he is. But he will soon remember once he has recognized me. To make it easier for him, I will wipe a little of the blinding cloud of worldly concern from his eyes. He has forgotten who he is. So, he recognizes philosophy. He asked her, why are you here? And then he gives his complaint. And this is the first question I asked you. What is Boethius's complaint to philosophy? Why is he so upset? I've had multiple parts written down, so take a stab at one of them even. If I look down my nose, I saw online, you should never ever do this, apparently, because it makes you look old. But I feel like, what else am I supposed to do? I can't look at you. I have to do this. What do you think? Yeah. This then is how you reward your followers? That's complaint number one. Nice. Nice philosophy. I gave you all my energy and I'm in prison. Expanding on that, he says, he's talking about Plato. You commended Plato's opinion that commonwealths would be blessed if they should be ruled by philosophers or if their rulers should have happened to have studied philosophy. You took your cue from him and said that the reason why it was necessary for philosophers to take part in government was to prevent the reins of government falling into the hands of wicked and unprincipled men to the ruin and destruction of the good. And it was upon this authority that I decided to transfer to public administration what I had learned from you in the course of private leisure. The reason I'm being tried for treason is because I was in the government and had access to sensitive information. And the only reason I was there is because philosophy told me to. I'm a philosopher. I'm supposed to contribute to the public good and take public office because it's better for people. It wasn't better for me. You and God, who has sowed you in the minds of wise men, are my witnesses that the only consideration to impel me to any office was a general desire for good. It's your fault I'm in this fix philosophy. Then he goes on to say, you know, I'll not only feel bad for myself, but now everybody thinks philosophy is idiotic because I'm known as being philosophical, and look at me. It is not enough that my devotion to you has not helped me at all, but you are now made the victim of the hatred that should be directed at me alone. Over and above all this, another weight is added to my load of ills, in that the world does not judge actions on their merit, but on their chance results. And they consider that only those things which are blessed with a happy outcome have been undertaken with sound advice. It is always the unfortunate who are first to be deserted by the goodwill of men. Hard question for us now. When something bad happens to someone, okay, it doesn't even have to be bad. It just isn't blessed. Okay, so the only, because this can be controversial in Christian circles, you know, I've heard churches lamenting or pastors lamenting the fact that our church isn't growing. We don't have enough people attending here. So what? Does that mean that they're doing something wrong? Not a rhetorical question. If you have a small church, does that mean you're doing something wrong, that you're not teaching the truth? No, it doesn't mean that at all. Had a lot of people leave. At the end, they all left, and only John was standing under the cross. Not to mention that one of his own inner circle turned him in. But I hear this, oh, we need to do something to bring in more, we need the numbers to be better. You know, there are mega churches that are heretical, quite frankly, that are teaching that if you love God, you will be rich, right? And your life will be great. Not true. In fact, the Bible specifically says not true. And so, but, okay, so now this is my confessions, or maybe our group confessions. Is it sometimes, though, easy to look at a bad situation and think, oh, they must have brought that on themselves, or like Job's friends. Yeah, Job, you sure you didn't tick God off? Pretty sure you must have ticked God off. You wouldn't be in this position. But we know the behind the scenes. Job didn't do anything wrong. I'm not saying he was sinless, but there was something else going on entirely. Boethius has, you know, perhaps fallen into this trap that it's easy for us to fall into. Not Boethius so much as the people around him, I guess. He's saying, people look at me now and say, I must have been misguided or unwise. Because people judge by the outcome. If it turned out well, we think it must have been good and wise. And if it turned out poorly, we think not so. And of course, if the story stopped with the crucifixion, but even it didn't stop at the crucifixion, that was not a good thing. But it was the best thing. It was not misguided or wrong in any way. Okay, so this is Boethius's position. Everybody looks down on me because I crashed and burned. People are looking down on philosophy. And you owed me more than this. I was one of the good guys. I was one of the good guys. How did I end up like this? Yeah, he goes on, and that same strain. The final burden which adversity heaps on her victims is that when some accusation is made against them, they are believed to have deserved all they suffer. Now, here's another thing, and this might remind you of something in the Bible. I seem to see the wicked haunts of criminals overflowing with happiness and joy. I seem to see all the most desperate of men threatening new false denunciations. I seem to see good men lying prostrate with fear at the danger I am in, while all abandoned villains are encouraged to attempt every crime in the expectation of impunity, or even in the hope of reward for its accomplishment. And I seem to see the innocent deprived of peace and safety and even all their chance of self-defense. You might not be able to cite the exact place, and I'm afraid I can't either, but I can tell you what book it's in. Passages of scripture where it says, seems to me like all the wicked men are prospering. Doesn't it seem to you like all the wicked men are prospering and the good men are just down? Can you think of an area of the Bible that has laments like that? A particularly long book of the Bible. Lamentations is not particularly long, and it is full of lamentations. I'm thinking of Psalms. There are various Psalms. That's the whole Psalm. And then David or the psalmist will say, but while I was thinking all this, then I went into the temple of the Lord. And I contemplated the ends of the two different types of people. And I realized, oh, there's more to the story than what I'm seeing currently. All right. This is Boethius's state of mind, right? And what is... Oh, let's skip up to this. What is responsible for Boethius's illness, according to philosophy? What has happened to him? You have forgotten who you are. She says early on, you have wandered away from yourself. Or if you prefer to be thought of as having been banished, it is you yourself that have been the instrument of it. No one else could ever have done it. Why not? Because God, she says, who rules all things, you seem to have forgotten the oldest law of your community, of God and of philosophy. Any man who has chosen to make his dwelling there has the sacred right never to be banished. Because where do you carry it? Where do you carry philosophy or love for God? Where does it exist? Is it in your purse? Is it in your suitcase? Can you lose it in a fire if your house burns down? Where is it? It's inside you. I can't be banished from myself unless I choose to be. She says, it is not the walls of your library with their glass and ivory decoration that I am looking for, but the seat of your mind. That's what you've been banished from. And then she says this. Your defenses have been breached, and your mind has been infiltrated by the fever of emotional distraction. She asked him, do you believe life is just haphazard and random? And he says, no, God watches over creation. And then she says, okay, well, how does he guide it? How does he rule it? He says, I don't know. She says, well, what's the purpose of all things? What's the goal of nature? What's the goal of everything that's been created? I don't know. He says, I don't know. Finally, she gives him an easier question. Do you remember that you are a man? Because you don't seem to know many answers, Boethius, right now. Do you remember that you're a man? Why shouldn't I? He said. Can you then tell me what a man is? Are you asking me if I know whether man is a rational and mortal animal? I do know it, and I acknowledge that that is what I am. Are you sure you are not something more? Quite sure. Now I know the other cause, or rather the major cause of your illness. You have forgotten your true nature. You are confused by loss of memory because you don't know the end and purpose of things. And because you have forgotten the means by which the world is governed, you believe these ups and downs of fortune happen haphazardly. There's no pattern. There's no sense in it. Okay, and so that's where we end book 1. She hasn't really helped him yet. You know, do you know that the word for repent in Greek in the Bible, metanoia, it means turning your mind, changing your mind, right? And if you're wandering off down the wrong path and you want to repent of sorts, well, let's make it not that. You're wandering in the woods. How about you're literally wandering? Okay, we'll do that. You're literally wandering in the woods and you have taken the wrong path. And you realize it. What are you going to do to get back on the right path? Well, turn around, hopefully. Unfortunately, if you're my husband, you'll probably just cut across country because there's probably a shortcut in that. I'm sorry. He will never watch this, so he will not know. Yeah, it's foolhardy to just decide, oh, it must be over there. I'll find it eventually. No, sometimes you got to turn around and go back and start over. Boethius isn't any better off yet, but philosophy has just taken him by the shoulders and turned him around and said, we're going to go back now. Doesn't look like she's done much, but wake up, Boethius. Stop singing your sad songs with the muses. Are you sure you're nothing but a rational animal? That's what you got for me? That's the nature of man? All right, let's spin around and get you back on the right path. All right. So that's what she's got to do now. I think he's just writing it. This was a set in the ancient world and even up into the Middle Ages. Writing a book with a personified virtue or vice or something like that, where you're conversing with it, was a set idea. So even up to in the 1500s, there was a man named Erasmus, a famous humanist and reformer, and he wrote a book called The Praise of Folly. It was a satire because he's saying, oh, folly, foolishness. Oh, the world couldn't spin without foolishness because stupid people fall in love and have kids, you know. It's that sort of thing. But it's the same kind of book. So I don't think he's literally, this is just an exercise. Okay, so she says, if I have fully diagnosed the cause and nature of your condition, you are wasting away and pining and longing for your former good fortune, right? If things crash and burn around you, what do you put on the sad songs, and then what do? Oh, I remember when everything was going well. I had everything. You know, I remember yesterday when I thought I was going to get those tickets from Ticketmaster. You know, I already planned out the whole evening, how we were going to go and have dinner and everything. The whole evening planned. Oh, I was happy then, and now I'll never get to go to this concert because it's sold out. I know that's minor, but most of us aren't in prison for, you know, treason. You're pining and longing for your former good fortune. Okay, what does she say is fortune's normal behavior, and how does that wheel suit her? How does fortune act? Pause. Okay, she's described in a way that sounds a bit manipulative, but what in more general, and less something less insulting to fortune. What does fortune do? She changes. She's random, and the wheel keeps us spinning around. Because now I'm thinking of a rock song, fortunately. But okay, Mrs. Fincher knows, jet airliner. The big wheel keeps us spinning around. And I mean, this has been for 1,000 years. We've been picturing that's what good fortune and bad fortune are like. She says change is her normal behavior, her true nature. So here's the thing. Do you really hold dear that kind of happiness which is destined to pass away? The stuff that we think of as gifts of fortune, Right? You even, when you did your encomium or invective, right? Praised goods of the body, goods of the mind, and goods of fortune. Sometimes the battle goes well for you just because it does. Some chance occurrence. I mean, it's not because you're a brilliant general. Sometimes people get rich, they inherit tons of money, or they win the lottery. How many people played the lottery? But you won. It's by chance. Do you really hold dear that kind of happiness which is destined to pass away? You know, maybe you guys know this. There are many, many stories of people who win the lottery and they squander all the money. And then, you know, you have to pay taxes on it. And they don't account for this, and they waste, and then they end up sometimes worse off financially later. It doesn't always happen that way, but it does happen that way. Easy come, easy go, as they say. Money is like that. So she said, is that happiness? Can your happiness be in those things if you can lose them? Fortune's very mutability deprives her threats of their terror and her enticements of their allure. I'm going to read that again. Fortune's very mutability, changeableness, deprives her threats of their terror and her enticements of their allure. You're threatened with something bad, or something bad happens to you, but you could choose to say, well, these things happen sometimes, but I'll be back up on top eventually. It'll come around, it'll get better. Likewise, her enticements don't allure. Oh, I'm on top of the world right now. Everything's going swimmingly. Yeah, but it might not. Some of you, and she actually mentions this person, remember the story of Croesus we read in Herodotus last year. Croesus was the king of Lydia, who the famous lawgiver Solon from Athens came to visit him, and he says, aren't I lucky? And Solon said, yeah, we don't really know until the end of the story, do we? Well, this Croesus got captured by the king of Persia, and they're getting ready to burn him. And he's yelling, oh, Solon! And the king of Persia is like, wait a minute, who's this Solon guy? He's like, oh, this guy came, and he told me I shouldn't be too proud of all my happiness and good fortune because I might lose it before the end. And the Persian king was so impressed that he spared his life. And Croesus ended up traveling around on campaign with the king of Persia. Okay. If you are trying to stop her wheel from turning, you are of all men the most obtuse. For if it once begins to stop, it will no longer be the wheel of chance. So she said, I'm going to do a little exercise with you, Boethius. I'm going to pretend to be Fortune. I'm going to have a little conversation with you. I am now Fortune. Here's what I would say. Why do you burden me each day, mortal man, with your querulous accusations? What harm have I done you? What possessions of yours have I stolen? You have been receiving a favor as one who had the use of another's possessions, and you have no right to complain if what you have lost, as if what you have lost was fully your own. I can say with confidence that if the things whose loss you are bemoaning were really yours, you could never have lost them. Inconstancy is my very essence. It is the game I never cease to play as I turn my wheel in its ever-changing circle, filled with joy as I bring the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top. He said, all that you have said is certainly plausible, but it is only while one is actually listening that one is filled with pleasure, and for the wretched, the pain of their suffering goes deeper. If something bad happens to you and somebody says, well, let me explain this to you, you know that these things happen. And you know you're on the bottom right now, but things will get better. Does this make you feel better? Maybe a little, not much. Maybe, as he said, it gives you pleasure while you're listening, and then your friend leaves, and then you sit there and think about it. Oh, I'm so angry and miserable. Knowing this is true and taking it inside yourself are two different things. Do you know what I mean? You can know something in your head, but not really believe it in your heart. I think Boethius believes her in his head. Okay, I get it. Yes, fortune is always changeable, but your philosophy, you're not helping me. You're not helping me deep down where it hurts. She says, it is true, for none of this is meant to be a cure, but simply kind of application to help soothe a grief still resistant to treatment. I'm not even started doctoring you, really. I'm just kind of anesthetizing you a little bit so I can get to work on the surgery. She says, let's keep working on this, anesthetizing you. Have you forgotten how fortunate you have been in many ways? She says, you were an orphan, and you were taken into the care of one of the most powerful men in Rome, who advanced you, gave you money, gave you position, gave you the power to pursue philosophy. Remember that day you saw your two sons become consul together? In my opinion, you beguiled fortune with empty words so long as you had her caresses, and she cherished you as her darling. And you went off with a gift never